e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6, a3, e5, knight f5, d5, bishop g5, d4, bishop takes f6, g takes f6, knight b1, bishop takes f5, e takes f5, queen d5, queen g4, h5, queen h4, knight d7, knight d2, rook g8, queen e4, queen takes e4, check, knight takes e4, rook c8,
castle queenside,
h4, g3, bishop h6, check, king b1, king e7, bishop g2, b6, c3, knight c5, c takes d4, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, a5, rook he1, rook gd8, bishop c2, rook c4, d takes e5, rook takes d1, check, rook takes d1, f takes e5, f6, check, king takes f6, rook d6, check, king g7, rook takes b6, bishop d2, rook b5, h takes g3, h takes g3, e4, rook b7, e3, f takes e3, rook g4, e4, rook takes g3, bishop b3, rook f3, e5, king f8, king c2, bishop e3, bishop d5, rook f2, check, king c3, bishop d2, check, king c4, bishop c1, b4, a takes b4, a takes b4, bishop b2, e6, f takes e6, bishop takes e6, rook e2, king d5, rook d2, check, king c6, bishop e5, bishop d5, king e8, bishop e4, Rook d6, check. King c5. King d8. Rook h7. Rook d7. Rook h5. Bishop d4, check. King c4. Bishop e3. Bishop d5. King c7. Rook e5. Bishop b6. King b5. Bishop d4. Rook g5. Rook d6. Rook h5. Bishop e3. King c4. Rook h6. Rook e5. Rook h4, check. King b5. Bishop d2. Bishop c4. Bishop c3. Rook c5, check. King d6. Rook c6, check. King e5. King a4. Bishop d2. b5. Rook h6. Rook c5, check. King f4. Bishop d5. Bishop e3. Rook c4, check. King f5. King a5. Bishop d2, check. King a4. Bishop e3. Rook e4. Bishop b6. Rook e8. Rook d6. Bishop c6. Rook d4, check. King b3. Rook d8. Rook e7. Rook d3, check. King c2. Rook d6. Rook b7. Bishop g1. King c3. King e5. King b4. Rook d2. Rook e7, check. King f6. Rook e8. Rook b2, check. King c3. Rook b1. Rook e2. Bishop b6. Bishop d7. Rook e1. Rook h2. King e7. Bishop f5. Rook e5. Bishop d3. King d6. King c4. Rook c5, check. King b4. Rook e5. Rook h6, check. Rook e6. Rook h8. Rook f6. Bishop e4. King e5. Bishop c6. Rook f4, check. King b3. King d6. Rook h6, check. King e5. Bishop g2. Rook f6. Rook h1. Rook g6. Rook e1, check. King d6. Rook d1, check. King e5. Bishop a8. Rook g3, check. King c2. Rook g8. Bishop f3. Rook d8. Rook h1. Rook f8. Rook h3. Rook f6. King b3. King d6. Bishop e4. King e5. Bishop d3. King d4. Bishop c4. King e5. King b4. Rook f5. Rook d3. Rook f6. Rook d5, check. King e4. Rook h5. Rook d6. Rook h8. King d4. Rook c8. King e5. Rook c6.